I was sitting in the middle of Brussels when my wife called and said, "I've sold your house and I'm starting over with my trainer." Then she laughed. I didn't. I just opened my laptop. I was sitting at the window of a quiet hotel in Brussels, 4 days into a business trip negotiating a warehouse acquisition for a U.S. logistics firm, when my phone rang and everything I thought I understood about my life unraveled in 13 words. "I've sold the beach house, Miles, and I'm starting over. With Chad." Tasha's voice was calm, almost triumphant, and when she laughed, it was the kind of laugh you give to someone you've already moved on from. She didn't wait for a response, just filled the silence with details I'd barely absorbed. Chad, her personal trainer, 15 years younger, the man who apparently made her feel alive again, and how she'd already signed the sale papers, how the buyers were moving in next week, and how she figured I'd be fine staying at the Marriott since I was always on the road anyway. I didn't shout or ask her why or how or if she even realized what she was doing. I just stared out the window, watching the Belgian rain tap softly against the glass, each drop landing with a rhythm that felt more real than her words. Tasha, the woman I'd built 15 years of life with, who used to text me goodnight across time zones and send me photos of our garden blooming in early spring, had just rewritten our story with the casualness of deleting an old file. But in that moment, somewhere between shock and clarity, my training took over. The part of me that had spent 3 decades reviewing fine print, identifying leverage, and protecting investments in high-stakes negotiations. I didn't need drama. I needed documents. Without standing up, without even finishing the espresso beside me, I opened my laptop, pulled up a secure folder, and drafted 2 emails. The first was to Monica Chen, my title agent for over a decade, a woman who once caught a $2,500,000 0-cent discrepancy before a deal collapsed. The second was to Brian Lindstrom, my attorney and longtime legal safety net, with the subject line typed in all caps, "Urgent fraudulent sale, preferably held in trust." I hit send, then closed the laptop with care as if sealing away the shock. Tasha thought I would break, but she'd forgotten one thing. I don't do panic, I do precision. And if there's one truth in real estate that holds in life, it's this: ownership is always about who holds the paper. Some people unravel in chaos, others in silence, and Tasha unraveled in silence. As I watched the gray drizzle soften the edges of Brussels that day, the memory of how we began came back to me like a photograph left too long in the sun, faded at the edges, but still intact. We met 13 years ago at a commercial real estate conference in Miami. I was giving a panel talk on high-risk zoning acquisitions, and she was working hospitality PR for one of the venue sponsors. She had that rare kind of confidence that wasn't loud but sharp. You could feel it in the way she looked at you, like she already knew if you'd be worth her time. We got drinks afterward, then dinner. Then 2 months later we were married at the county courthouse with her sister and my brother holding cell phones for photos instead of rings. It was fast, too fast some said, but back then it felt like speed was the currency of destiny. We bought the beach house a year later, a quiet 2-story retreat on Amelia Island with wraparound decks and the kind of sunset view that makes you believe in forever. She picked the furniture, I fixed the wood rot. She hosted, I retreated to my study to review contracts by lamplight. For a while, that worked. It worked better than most. We traveled together when she had time. Barcelona, Santorini, even Seoul once for a quick deal I had to close. I remember one night, watching her sip red wine on the hotel balcony, barefoot and laughing about the waiter who called me Mr. Carter, sir, like I was some Wall Street king. She said that balcony was her favorite place in the world. Now, I wonder if she meant it then, or if she just hadn't met Chad yet. It's hard to say when the shift began, but I can tell you how it felt. Like living in a house where the temperature drops slowly enough that you don't realize you're cold until your breath fogs the mirror. Her texts got shorter. Travel safe replaced I miss you. The weekends filled up with spa retreats and girls' nights that never included names. Her phone, once left on kitchen counters or tossed beside her pillow, was now always face down, locked, guarded like a vault. I noticed it all. Of course I did. I'm in the business of noticing things. And if Tasha had remembered that, she might have been more careful. I didn't confront her. Didn't install spyware or tail her like some men do. Instead, I chose the path I knew best, the quiet path, the one built not on reaction, but on readiness. 11 months ago, while refinancing one of our Tampa properties, I folded a simple piece of paper into the closing packet, a transfer of deed for the beach house into a private living trust with me as sole trustee. She signed it distractedly between texts, sipping her smoothie, never reading a word. Why so much paperwork, she asked with a laugh, and I replied as I always did, it protects us both. Which, in a way, it did. I didn't stop her from growing distant. I didn't ask her to stay, but I made sure if she left, she wouldn't take the parts of me that couldn't be replaced. And that's the thing about silence. It's not weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. It wasn't about revenge. Not then, not even now. It was about something far simpler. Certainty. After years of dealing with negotiations where a single missing clause could cost millions, I'd learned the power of language on paper. The quiet might of a signature in the right place, the permanence of ink on the right line. So, when the shift in Tasha began, when the warmth in her voice cooled and her eyes spent more time on screens than mine, I did what I'd been trained to do. I didn't scream, I structured. The idea of the trust came to me one night in my Jacksonville office while reviewing commercial zoning revisions. I'd flipped to the last page of a document and paused, not because of what was missing, but because of what was there. A simple line requiring the signature of all vested owners for any future sale. One line, one layer of protection. That night, I opened a folder on my desk, labeled it Private Holdings, and started writing a new future for myself, one rooted in safeguards. The living trust wasn't complicated, that was the beauty of it. I kept the structure clean and elegant. The George Miles Carter Living Trust, revocable, held by me as sole trustee, with the Amelia Island property as its primary asset. My lawyer Brian helped with the filing. We folded it neatly into a stack of refinance paperwork for our investment property in Tampa, papers that required both our signatures for processing. I remember the day vividly, the morning sun filtering through our kitchen windows. Tasha sat across from me at the granite island, sipping her turmeric smoothie, wearing gym gear, scrolling her phone with the kind of attention most people reserve for emergency sirens. Brian, always the gentleman, laid out the documents carefully, explaining the basics. "We've got about 10 signatures here," he said, sliding the folder forward. "Standard refi structure. A few new tax positions. A trust clause to centralize asset reporting, all common practice." Tasha nodded vaguely, not even looking up. That's fine. I trust Miles." She signed page after page without reading a word. I didn't rush her. I didn't say a thing, just watched, knowing exactly what she was authorizing. Somewhere between the 5th and 6th page, she looked up and smirked. "You know," she said, pen hovering, "you're the only man I've met who actually reads this crap line by line." I smiled back. "That's why I still have a career." She laughed, the sound light and dismissive, and returned to her phone while Brian quietly collected the documents. It was the last time she would ever touch the deed to our home, and the last time she laughed at my obsession with contracts. A month later, the trust was fully filed and active. From that moment on, the beach house no longer belonged to Miles and Tasha Carter. It belonged to the trust. To me. Solely, legally, quietly. I didn't change the locks. I didn't cancel her name on the utility bills. I simply changed the one thing that mattered most in property law, the paper trail. She went on planning spa trips and signing up for fitness challenges. I went on working my deals, reviewing municipal code changes, and finding undervalued parcels of land others had overlooked. But now I had something I hadn't had before. Control over my most prized space. Not just the structure of the house, but what it represented. Tasha had once called it our forever home. She even toasted to it that first night, barefoot on the deck with a glass of Pinot Grigio, saying, "No matter where we travel, we'll always come back here. Our anchor." And for years I believed that. I upgraded the kitchen with my own hands, installed the hurricane windows myself one stormy weekend when our contractor flaked, fixed the plumbing when it backed up during that summer she tried to host a yoga retreat. I never complained. Never reminded her of the late nights or the weekends spent with a drill in one hand and a checklist in the other, because I thought I was building something for us. Turns out, I was just building it well enough to keep. The trust had a secondary clause, an asset protection mechanism. In the event of divorce or asset division, the house would remain indivisible due to its legal separation from the marital estate. Not just a loophole, a lock. The best part? It wasn't buried. It was right there, in Section 4.3b, a clause I'd written myself, modeled after a case I once won against a negligent co-developer who tried to liquidate shared property without consulting my client. At the time, I thought I was being overly cautious, but now, looking back, it feels less like caution and more like prophecy. When Tasha called me from that Brussels morning and proudly declared she'd already sold the house, all I could think of was that clause 4.3b. All she could think of, I imagine, was the cash. She never saw the documents again, never asked about them, never thought that anything we'd signed a year ago could come back to stop her from building a new life with a man who once asked me how much my watch cost. But paper doesn't forget. Paper doesn't blink. And Tasha, for all her intuition and beauty and charm, had made the cardinal mistake in every contract dispute I'd ever mediated. She didn't read what she signed, and that's the thing about trusts. They're not just financial vehicles. They're time-locked answers to future betrayals. I didn't plan for this exact betrayal, no, but I planned for the day things might go sideways. Because in my world, the deal's only safe once it's signed and sealed, and as it turns out, forever homes don't last forever. But deeds filed properly? They just might. There was a strange kind of peace in knowing exactly what needed to be done. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text a warning. I landed in Jacksonville just after noon, rented a sedan from the airport, and drove the 40-minute stretch to Amelia Island, with the windows down and no music playing. The ocean breeze carried the salt and stillness of inevitability. The neighborhood looked unchanged, quiet, sun-bleached, framed by palm trees and manicured hedges. But the car in the driveway wasn't mine. A black Mercedes convertible with temporary plates and an obnoxious vanity frame that read, "Train hard," subtle as a punch to the jaw. I parked beside it. My key still worked. That was the first surprise. The second was the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. I walked in slowly, suitcase in hand, the wheels silent on the hardwood. I didn't need to hear more than a few words to understand the scene. Tasha's voice, Chad's voice, and the phrase "open concept" will really make it pop. I stood in the hallway just long enough to let the moment breathe, then turned the corner. Tasha was leaning on the marble island in a sundress I didn't recognize, holding a flute of champagne. Chad was beside her, gesturing at something on his tablet, one arm draped too casually around her waist. When they saw me, Chad's face stiffened. Tasha's eyes widened for half a second, then narrowed back into the smile she used when pretending everything was under control. "Miles," she said, like my name was something she hadn't practiced saying in weeks. "You're back early, I thought." "Monday," I finished for her. "You thought I'd be back Monday." I looked at Chad. "And you must be the interior design consultant now." He let go of her waist, stepped back with the awkward shuffle of a man caught using another man's. "This is awkward," he said. "I should probably—" "No," I said, setting my suitcase down. "You should stay. This concerns you, too." Tasha straightened up. Her smile dropped. "Miles, we don't have to do this right now. Actually, we do." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 2 folders. "These are for you." I placed them on the counter, slid them across the marble like playing cards. "What is this?" she asked, not touching them yet. "The deed," I said, "and the trust agreement. You'll find that you never had the legal authority to sell this house." She blinked. "What are you talking about? The sale went through. The buyers have been notified," I cut in. "The sale is void. You sold something you don't own, Tasha. This house hasn't belonged to you, not in any legal sense, for nearly a year." Chad looked at her. "Wait, you told me it was final. You said it was clean." Tasha picked up the documents, flipped through them, her fingers twitching now. This is buried in the Tampa paperwork," she snapped. "You said that was just refi stuff." "I did," I said. "And you signed every page while texting someone about your yoga retreat. You didn't ask questions then. You don't get to rewrite the facts now." She looked up, fury behind her eyes. "You tricked me." "No," I said calmly. "I protected myself. That's what contracts are for. That's what I do, remember? I negotiate terms, I secure assets, and I read every line." Chad backed toward the hallway. "I'm gonna give you 2 space." "Good idea," I said without looking at him. He hesitated. "This isn't what she said it was. No one cares, Chad," I said flatly. "The adults are talking." He left. Tasha slammed the folder shut. "You can't do this." I already did. "You can't just throw away 15 years of marriage and say I get nothing. You tried to sell the house behind my back while I was overseas. You moved in your personal trainer. You laughed while doing it. Let's not pretend we're splitting a birthday cake." Her voice softened now. The shift was instant. Saccharine, strategic. "Miles, this doesn't have to get ugly. Let's just split the proceeds. You keep the trust, I get my share, we move on." I shook my head. "No proceeds, no split. There's no sale. The house stays, and I'll be moving back in on Monday. You can collect your things before then. She stared at me, mouth open. You're serious. Deadly. I'll get my lawyer, she hissed. You won't win this. You already lost it, I replied. The second you chose not to read the contract, she picked up her phone, her hands shaking. I'll burn this whole thing down. You do what you need to do, I said, grabbing my suitcase. But I'd suggest reading the documents this time. It's all in there. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. This isn't over, Miles. I paused at the doorway, hand on the knob, turned back just enough to meet her eyes. Actually, Tasha, I said, voice steady, I think it is. And then I left. The house was silent behind me, but I knew that silence wouldn't last, not once she read the fine print. The next morning, Miles sat across from Brian Eldridge in the quiet stillness of the attorney's downtown office, where the weekend silence made every paper shuffle and pen scratch feel sharper. Brian didn't waste time. There's more, he said, sliding a folder across the desk with a weight that had nothing to do with paper. Inside were months of bank statements and digital trails, evidence that Tasha had slowly siphoned over $170,000 0 cents from their joint accounts into a private fund she'd quietly opened a year ago. Each withdrawal was small enough to escape casual notice, but together they painted a clear picture. This wasn't a sudden decision, it was a long-planned escape. Miles felt the cold punch of betrayal all over again, but this time it didn't knock the wind out of him. It sharpened him. She's been moving the money in preparation, Brian continued, flipping to the next document. For this, he revealed preliminary lease agreements signed by Tasha and Chad for a boutique fitness studio in Savannah. The name on the application? A new LLC she'd registered 6 months ago, tucked neatly under a real estate holding firm. Miles leaned forward, examining the signatures. Chad's slanted initials were there too, alongside plans for renovations and a marketing budget. This was never just a love affair, Miles said quietly, the words heavier than anger. They were building something with my money. Brian nodded grimly. And it gets better. The buyer for your beach house? It's a shell company, owned by none other than Jason Bennett. Chad's brother, Miles muttered. They were planning to flip the house. Brian confirmed with a tight nod. Below market value, clean title transfer, make a killing on the resale, and if you hadn't caught the sale in time, they would have pulled it off. Miles sat back, the pieces now fitting together with chilling precision. What had seemed like a messy emotional betrayal was, in fact, a calculated financial extraction, a slow, careful siphon of assets and property dressed up as a midlife reinvention. It wasn't just disloyalty, it was orchestration. And yet, the deeper he sank into this web, the calmer he became. The facts were his allies now, the paper trail undeniable. For years, Miles had taught clients to read between the lines of contracts, to anticipate moves before they were made. Now he was living that very advice. This wasn't about punishing Tasha or destroying Chad. It was about clarity, about justice, about not allowing years of sweat, patience, and principle to be wiped away by someone else's entitlement. She still thinks she's in control, Miles said, closing the folder gently, but she has no idea she's already been outmaneuvered. Brian gave a half smile. Then it's time she finds out. The transition was complete now, from heartbreak to resolve, from personal to tactical. And for Miles Carter, this was no longer just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of reclaiming everything that was his. By the time the door of Brian's office clicked shut behind them, Miles had already made his decision, not out of emotion, but out of principle. The evidence was damning, airtight, undeniable. But this wasn't about vengeance. It never had been. Brian laid out the options with his usual calm precision. We can go in with everything, press for criminal charges, fraud, attempted grand theft, misappropriation of marital assets. She could be facing serious consequences. Or, he paused, letting the second path settle into the room like a softer echo. Or we offer a clean break. She returns the funds, signs away any claim to the beach house and your other assets, and in exchange, we don't pursue charges. No courtroom spectacle, just a signature and silence. Miles stared at the settlement draft in front of him, his eyes moving over the neatly typed lines, the calculated fairness of it. It wasn't generosity, it was restraint. It was the difference between burning down a bridge and simply locking the gate. He thought of Tasha, not the version laughing cruelly through the phone, but the woman from a decade ago who'd toasted to forever on their first night in that house, barefoot on the deck, sea breeze catching her hair. People change, intentions fade, but some part of him still respected the past they'd shared, even if she no longer did. "I don't want to ruin her," Miles said finally, voice low but unwavering. "But I'm not going to let her walk away with everything I built either." Brian nodded. "Then we give her a choice. Let her decide what kind of ending she wants." Miles signed the settlement proposal with deliberate calm, each stroke of the pen reinforcing the boundary he was reclaiming, not just around his finances, but around his dignity. This wasn't about breaking her. It was about refusing to be broken. The letter would go out that afternoon, giving her 48 hours to respond before they escalated to litigation. As Brian prepared the final documents, Miles looked out the office window at the Jacksonville skyline. The city had always been a place of negotiation for him. Contracts, zoning laws, development deals. But this was personal terrain now, and for once, the negotiation was about something deeper than percentages or property lines. It was about self-worth. Miles didn't want her studio. He didn't want her new life dismantled. He just wanted the truth acknowledged and his boundaries respected. If she had even a shred of the person he once knew still left inside her, she'd sign. If not, then he'd meet her in court, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Either way, he would walk away with his name, his house, and his peace intact. And for Miles Carter, that was justice enough. The following morning, Miles sipped his coffee in silence as the sun crept over the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the hardwood floor of the beach house he had reclaimed. His phone buzzed with a notification, an email forwarded from Brian. It was from Tasha's attorney. The tone was predictably arrogant, dismissive even, referring to the living trust and the property deed as clever paperwork tricks, and accusing Miles of attempting to weaponize fine print in bad faith. It was, in every way, a challenge, an attempt to provoke him, to scare him into negotiating from a place of weakness. But what they didn't understand, what they'd never understood, was that Miles Carter didn't bluff. Within an hour, Brian had responded, not with a rebuttal, but with a quiet thunder of precision. Attached were the notarized trust documents, time-stamped emails, the affidavit from the title agent, and copies of the transfer records, evidence so airtight it hummed with inevitability. But it didn't stop there. Brian included a second packet, bank statements showing the gradual siphoning of $170,000, 0 cents, corporate filings connecting Chad's brother to the shell company that had tried to buy the house, and draft leases for the boutique fitness studio signed months before the beach house was even listed. It was a tapestry of betrayal, woven with intent, fraud, and greed, and now, exposed in full light. Miles didn't need to speak. The paper trail said everything. That evening, Chad showed up at the house unannounced, his confidence visibly shaken, eyes darting like a man who just realized the ground beneath him wasn't concrete, but glass. "Look," he stammered. "I didn't know. Tasha told me the house was hers. She said everything was already worked out." Miles didn't move from his seat. "She lied. And now you're in the middle of it." Chad's shoulders slumped. "I just wanted to help her start something new. The business, the house. It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Then walk away," Miles said flatly, "before it gets worse." Chad nodded, defeated. "I'm done," he mumbled, and walked out the door, leaving nothing behind but a faint scent of cologne and the aftertaste of cowardice. The next day, Tasha's lawyer requested a meeting. Not a court date, a meeting. In Brian's conference room, under harsh fluorescent lights and behind a thick silence, Tasha sat across from Miles, her face no longer smug or composed, but tight and pale, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the documents in front of her. "We've reviewed the materials," her attorney began, the earlier bravado drained from his voice. "We believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this privately." Brian said nothing. He simply slid the same settlement agreement across the table. Tasha stared at it. The same elegant signature she'd once used on anniversary cards now trembled as she scribbled her name on the dotted line. No arguments, no last-minute insults, just quiet surrender. And as she pushed the papers back across the table, her hand lingered for a second, not seeking reconciliation, just bracing for the final impact of what she'd lost. Miles didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The room already knew who had walked in with truth, and who had walked out with nothing. The elevator chimed softly as Miles stepped out onto the 17th floor, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, not out of vanity, but because he believed even the ending of a marriage deserved dignity. The hallway to Brian's office was quiet, carpeted in muted gray, sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows as if the universe itself had agreed to lower its voice for this final scene. Inside the conference room, Everything was already laid out. A pitcher of water, 2 pens, 3 copies of the settlement. Tasha was there, seated across the long table, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She looked different somehow, more composed than she had been during the last confrontation, but less certain than she used to be. There was no fire in her eyes, no icy defiance, just a tired flicker of someone who had calculated the odds and found them unworkable. Her lawyer greeted Miles with a professional nod, then gestured to the chair prepared for him. Miles sat down without speaking, his hands calm, his breath steady. Brian opened the meeting with a few formalities, summarizing the terms of the agreement. No claim to the beach house, $100,000 0 cents returned from the siphoned funds, no criminal proceedings pursued, full release of future obligations. As Brian spoke, Miles's gaze never left the view beyond the window. The city skyline, cranes moving like patient giants, distant traffic flowing in patterns that no one controlled but everyone trusted. When it was time to sign, Tasha reached for the pen first. There was no hesitation, but no ceremony either. She signed each page deliberately, the pen scratching softly against the paper. When she was done, she pushed the folder across the table and leaned back in her chair as if her spine had suddenly given up the fight. Miles picked up the pen next. His signature had always been the same, simple, exact, practiced from years of contracts, agreements, and deals where precision mattered more than flourish. He signed where needed, then closed the folder gently. There were no dramatic speeches, no parting monologues, no accusatory stares. When it was over, Miles stood, adjusted his jacket, and looked at Tasha for the first time since walking in. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but clear. Not for the years, not for the pain, but for the clarity. Because sometimes even betrayal has a strange gift. It tells you exactly who someone is, and exactly who you've become in response. Tasha opened her mouth as if to say something, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to defend, perhaps just to ask if he remembered the good parts. But no words came. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. And that was enough. Miles turned, walked out of the room, and stepped back into the hallway, the weight of the folder left behind replaced by something lighter, something freer. The door closed quietly behind him, and he didn't look back. Some chapters don't need punctuation, they just need to end. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air as Miles stepped onto the deck of the beach house, a mug of dark roast warming his hands, the early morning light stretching long and golden across the waves. It had been 3 months since the papers were signed and the final chapter closed, and in that quiet span of time, he had done what he always did best. Not react, but rebuild. The house no longer bore the marks of the past. The weather-beaten siding had been replaced with something more resilient, the kitchen counters redone not in marble or extravagance, but in clean, smooth quartz that felt timeless. Gone were the decorative touches chosen for appearances, replaced now with furniture that invited living rather than posing. It wasn't a fresh start, it was a rightful continuation. Each choice, each nail, each soft-hinged cabinet was not about erasing what had been, but about reclaiming what still was. This home, once imagined as a forever place for two, now stood proudly for one. A man who had faced betrayal not with bitterness, but with a quiet conviction that truth and preparation still meant something. As Miles leaned against the railing and took his first sip of coffee, the breeze lifted gently through the seagrass, whispering not of what had been lost, but of what had remained. His peace, his name, his rhythm. The world had tried in its own messy way to rearrange him. But here he stood, steady as the tide in a home that was no longer haunted, but healed. He thought of the long nights in Brussels, of Tasha's laughter through the phone, of the documents she hadn't read, of the lies that had piled up like driftwood after a storm. And yet, none of it had broken him. If anything, it had refined him. The man who had walked away from the conference room weeks ago was not bitter, not bruised, but clearer, lighter, and grounded in the truth that being underestimated was sometimes the best advantage of all. He watched 2 pelicans glide just above the surface of the water, effortless and focused, and felt a kinship with their quiet momentum. No one else needed to know the details. No one else needed to understand the quiet victories earned behind closed doors. He didn't need revenge or applause or even understanding. All he needed was this: his coffee, the morning light, the house he still called home, and the unwavering knowledge that some storms come not to destroy you, but to prove just how well you've built your foundation. He remembered it so clearly now, the way Tasha used to laugh when he paused too long over a contract, how she'd tap her manicured nails impatiently on the edge of a glossy granite countertop and tease, "Who even reads every single clause, Miles? Life's too short for legalese." Back then, she said it with affection, like someone charmed by his quirks, but certain she'd never need to respect them. Now he saw those moments not with bitterness, but with clarity. As the turning points she never noticed, the tiny cracks in how they viewed the world and each other. It was that very habit she used to roll her eyes at, that unshakable precision and insistence on understanding every line, every footnote, every implication buried in a document, that had saved him. Not from heartbreak, that had arrived anyway, but from ruin, from losing the home he built with his bare hands, and the future she tried to sell without a second thought. The trust, the deed, the structure, she never questioned because he wrapped it inside routine paperwork. Those were not tricks. They were the bricks of a fortress, quietly built by a man who had spent a lifetime reading what others ignored. He stood on the back deck again, this time with a phone to his ear, and the sunrise painting amber streaks across the surface of his coffee. Monica's voice on the other end was familiar, calm and filled with a note of excitement. "I've got something new for you," she said, "downtown, just outside the historic district. Early stage, good bones, needs someone with vision and patience." He smiled into the wind, knowing already he'd say yes. It wasn't about the deal, it was about the motion forward. It was about using the skills that had once been viewed as overly cautious, overly meticulous, overly much, and realizing they were the very reason he was standing here with his name, his house, his peace, still intact. When the world moved too fast, when others trusted charm over contracts, appearances over details, he had read the fine print. He had built a life not on fantasy, but foundation. And when that life came under siege, by betrayal, by manipulation, by the smug confidence of those who mistook kindness for weakness, he had not needed to raise his voice. The documents had spoken for him. The truth had stepped forward, clean and precise. Chad was long gone now. The studio had launched, yes, but with half the capital and twice the strain, and according to whispers from mutual friends, it was struggling to break even. Tasha, once so proud of curating perfection, was now quietly fighting to preserve a reputation that had cracked the moment her schemes were exposed. Miles didn't gloat. He didn't even check their social media anymore, not because he didn't care, but because he no longer had to. The past had been processed, the pain had been respected, and now the future was his alone to shape. He'd started renovations on a second property, this time a small commercial building just 2 blocks from the river, the kind of project that would take months but offer rewards far beyond the financial. He planned to lease it to small business owners, people who, like him, believed in steady growth and straight lines. He'd even started mentoring a young couple, first-time investors who reminded him of himself. Before experience had taught him how quickly trust could be misplaced. He taught them not just how to read a deal, but how to recognize the story behind it. Never confuse charm with character, he told them, and always read the last page first. The house itself had settled into a new rhythm. It no longer echoed with absence. The quiet felt earned, not empty. He'd framed a single photograph, just one, of him standing on the newly repaired deck, coffee in hand, sunrise behind him. No Tasha, no shadow of what was. Just Miles, and a day he'd met on his own terms. He didn't hang it on the wall. He kept it tucked into his leather portfolio, the same one he used to carry from deal to deal. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that surviving wasn't about noise or vengeance, it was about preparedness. It was about knowing who you were long before someone tried to tell you otherwise. As the wind picked up and the scent of salt cut through the air, he leaned forward just slightly, letting it all wash over him. Not the past, not the anger, but the knowledge, the peace, the full-circle satisfaction of knowing that what others had once mocked, his thoroughness, his patience, his insistence on doing things right, was the very thing that had kept him whole. In the end, it wasn't the betrayal that defined him. It was how he responded to it, with clarity, with integrity, with an eye on the contract and a hand on the doorknob of a future he'd walk into freely, fully, and without apology. The world hadn't changed. People would still laugh at the cautious, they'd still scoff at the ones who take the time to read what others sign blindly. But as he locked up the house and slid the keys into his jacket pocket, Miles Carter knew the truth. The ones who survive are not always the loudest or the fastest. Sometimes they're the ones who paused at the very beginning, read all the terms, and quietly made sure that no one could take away what mattered most. And that, he thought, stepping into the day, was a detail no one could afford to miss. What would you do if the one person you trusted most turned out to be the one quietly planning to take everything you had? It's a question that doesn't scream. It doesn't show up with sirens or warning bells. It whispers. It settles in slowly, like fog creeping under a door, until one day you realize the betrayal didn't begin when they left. It began the moment they decided to stop seeing you as someone worth protecting. There is a particular kind of silence that follows heartbreak, not the silence of shock or even sorrow, but a silence that stretches across days like a clean sheet of snow. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives gently, sitting beside you while you sip coffee alone, watching the ocean and wondering how everything you built with someone could unravel so easily. Miles Carter didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't fall apart. That's not because he wasn't broken inside, but because some people understand, on a cellular level, that strength is rarely loud. In a world that celebrates dramatic gestures and swift revenge, his story reminds us that grace, restraint, and foresight are still deeply powerful forms of dignity. There's a lesson in watching someone protect their peace not by fighting but by preparing. Miles had spent his career reading contracts with a highlighter in hand, searching for loopholes that others missed. That habit, which people mocked or overlooked, became the very thing that saved his future. His caution was never paranoia, it was wisdom. His quiet was never weakness, it was patience. But this story isn't just about a man who outmaneuvered betrayal through legal precision. It's about how people grieve when the betrayal isn't just about infidelity, but about the casual cruelty of being discarded like a used asset. Miles's real hurt didn't come from the affair. It came from how lightly he was treated in the aftermath, as if his memories could be packed into a moving box and replaced with open-concept remodeling plans, and yet, instead of returning fire with fire, he chose to anchor himself in facts, in truth. In legal documents signed long ago, documents that now stood like quiet sentinels between him and ruin. There's something profound about watching a person face emotional warfare and respond not with vengeance, but with structure, with order, with a calm that others mistake for surrender, but is in fact the most dangerous kind of confidence. Because when you know the ground you're standing on is solid, when you've done the work of preparing, of documenting, of trusting your instincts, you don't need to yell to be heard. What Miles teaches us is that we can reclaim power not by overpowering, but by refusing to be pulled into chaos. He didn't win because he beat someone. He won because he never lost himself. Even when the truth about the financial betrayal came to light, even when the layers of manipulation revealed themselves, he didn't let bitterness rot his heart. He didn't chase headlines or humiliation. He simply saw a clean break, a fair line in the sand, a new page. And that's the kind of strength we rarely see in stories these days. The man who walks away, not with trophies, but with clarity. His story also shows us the importance of legacy. Not the kind that's measured in dollars or property deeds, but the kind that's built through quiet consistency. Miles didn't just save his beach house, he saved a piece of himself. A piece that had been dulled and chipped away over years of dismissal and distance. By renovating the house, he wasn't just repairing siding or replacing windows. He was restoring belief that a person can be treated unfairly and still rise. That trust, once broken, doesn't have to destroy your trust in yourself. Some viewers may say this story is about karma. Others may see it as justice, but to me, it is about self-respect. Because when the dust settles, and the courts are done, and the signatures have dried, what really matters is how you feel when you look in the mirror. Did you stay true to your values? Did you speak with integrity? Did you protect what mattered most without becoming someone you no longer recognize? Miles did all of those things, and in doing so, he reminds us of something timeless, that sometimes the most powerful sentence you'll ever speak is the one you don't say out loud. That silence, when paired with truth, is louder than any accusation. That dignity, quiet, unwavering dignity, is the armor no one can take from you. And perhaps, in the end, this is what survival looks like for the quietly strong. Not just escaping a storm, but building something stronger in its place. If this story stayed with you or reminded you of someone you love, we invite you to join us. Subscribe to our channel for more quiet stories that speak volumes. We don't chase the noise, we honor the quiet strength in everyday lives. And if you've ever weathered your own storm, if you've ever stood tall when others expected you to fall, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your story. You never know who might be needing it tonight. With warmth,